Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading part 3, so let's get into it. He wasn't aware of breaking the paralysis which held him. At one moment, he was standing frozen in the hall by the telephone table, looking out at good old Bump, who seemed to have grown a screwdriver handle in the middle of his chest, where there was a ruff of white fur. What Amy had liked to call Bump's bib. At the next, he was standing in the middle of the porch with the chilly night air biting through his thin shirt, trying to look 6 different ways at once. He forced himself to stop. Shooter was gone, of course. That's why he had left the note. Nor did Shooter seem like the kind of nut who would enjoy watching Mort's obvious fear and horror. He was a nut, all right, but one which had fallen from a different tree. He had simply used him on Mort the way the farmer might use a crowbar on a stubborn rock in his North 40. There was nothing personal in it. It was just a job that had to be done. Then he thought of how Shooter's eyes had looked that afternoon and shivered violently. No, it was personal. It was all kinds of personal. He believes I did it, Mort whispered to the cold western Maine night, and the words came out in ragged chunks, bitten off by his chittering teeth. The crazy son of a bitch really believes I did it. He approached the garage cabinet, and his stomach rolled over like a dog doing a trick. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and he wasn't sure he could take care of what needed taking care of. Bump's head was cocked far to the left, giving him a grotesque, questioning look. His teeth, small, neat, and needle-sharp, were bared. There was a little blood around the blade at the screwdriver at the point where it was driven into his bib. But not very much. Bump was a friendly cat. If Shooter had approached him, Bump would not have shied away, and that was what Shooter must have done, Mort thought, and wiped the sick sweat off his forehead. He had picked the cat up, snapped its neck between his fingers like a popsicle stick, and then nailed it to the slanting roof of the garbage cabinet, all while Mort Rainey slept, if not the sleep of the just, that of the unheeding. Mort crumpled up the sheet of paper, stuffed it in his back pocket, then put his hand on Bump's chest. The body, not stiff and not even entirely cold, shifted under his hand. His stomach rolled again, but he forced his other hand to close around the screwdriver's yellow plastic handle and pull it free. He tossed the screwdriver onto the porch and held poor old Bump in his right hand like a bundle of rags. Now his stomach was in freefall, simply rolling and rolling and rolling. He lifted one of the 2 lids on top of the garbage cabinet and secured it with the hook and eyelet that kept the heavy lid from crashing down on the arms or head of whomever was depositing trash inside. 3 cans were lined up within. Mort lifted the lid from the center one and deposited Bump's body gently inside. It lay draped over the top of an olive green, hefty bag like a fur sole. He was suddenly furious with Shooter. If the man had appeared in the driveway at that second, Mort would have charged him without a second thought, driven him to the ground and choked him if he could. Easy. It really is catching. Maybe it was, and maybe he didn't care. It wasn't just that Shooter had killed his only companion in this lonely October house by the lake. It was that he had done it while Mort was asleep, and in such a way that good old Bump had become an object of revulsion, something it was hard not to puke over. Most of all, it was the fact that he had been forced to put his good cat in a garbage can like a piece of worthless trash. I'll bury him tomorrow. right over in that soft patch to the left of the house, in sight of the lake. Yes, but tonight, Bump would lie in undignified state on top of a hefty bag in the garbage cabinet because some man, some crazy son of a bitch, could be out there, and the man had a grudge over a story Mort Rainey hadn't even thought of for the last 5 years or so. The man was crazy, and consequently, Mort was afraid to bury Bump tonight, because, note or no note, Shooter might be out there. I want to kill him, and if the crazy bastard pushes me much more, I might just try to do that. He went inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Then he walked deliberately through the house, locking all of the doors and windows. When that was done, he went back to the window by the porch door and stared pensively out into the darkness. He could see the screwdriver lying on the boards, and the dark round hole the blade had made when Shooter plunged it into the right-hand lid of the garbage cabinet. All at once, he remembered he had been about to try Amy again. He plugged the jack into the wall. He dialed rapidly, fingers tapping the old familiar keys which added up to home, and wondered if he would tell Amy about Bump. There was an unnaturally long pause after the preliminary clicks, and he was about to hang up when there was one final click, so loud it was almost a thud, followed by a robot voice telling him that the number he had dialed was out of service. Wonderful, he muttered. What the hell did you do, Amy? Use it until it broke? He pushed the disconnect button down, thinking he would have to call Isabel Fortin after all, and while he was conning his memory for her phone number, the telephone rang in his hand. He hadn't realized how keyed up he was until that happened. He gave a squeaky little cry and skipped backward, dropping the telephone handset on the floor and then almost tripping over the goddamn bench Amy had bought and put by the telephone table. The bench absolutely no one, including Amy herself, ever used. He pawed out with one hand, grabbed the bookcase, and kept himself from falling. Then he snatched up the phone and said, "Hello? Is that you, Shooter?" For in that moment, when it seemed that the whole world was slowly but surely turning topsy-turvy, he couldn't imagine who else it could be. Mort? It was Amy, and she was nearly screaming. He knew the tone very well from the last 2 years of their marriage. It was either frustration or fury, more likely the latter. "Mort, is that you? Is it you? For God's sake, Mort! Yes, it's me," he said. He suddenly felt weary. "Where in the hell have you been? I've been trying to get you for the last 3 hours." "Asleep," he said. "You pulled the jack." She spoke in the tired but accusatory tone of one who had been down this road before. "Well, you picked a great time to do it this time, champ." "I tried to call around 5. I was at Ted's." "Well, somebody was there," he said. "Maybe." "What do you mean, someone was there?" she asked, whiplash quick. "Who was there?" "How the hell would I know, Amy? You're the one in Derry, remember? You, Derry, me, Tashmore. All I know is that the line was busy when I tried to call you. If you were over at Ted's, then I assume Isabel." "I'm still at Ted's," she said, and now her voice was queerly flat. "I guess I'll be at Ted's for quite a while to come, like it or not. Someone burned our house down, Mort. Someone burned it right to the ground." And suddenly, Amy began to cry. He had become so fixated on John Shooter that his immediate assumption, as he stood numbly in the hallway of the one remaining Rainey home, with the telephone screwed against his ear, was that Shooter had burned the house down. Motive? Why, certainly, officer. He burned the house, a restored Victorian, worth about $800,000, to get rid of a magazine, Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, to be precise, June of 1980 issue. But could it have been Shooter? Surely not. The distance between Derry and Tashmore was over 100 miles, and Bump's body had still been warm and flexible, the blood around the screwdriver blade tacky but not yet dry. If he hurried. Oh, quit it, why don't you? Pretty soon you'll be blaming Shooter for your divorce and thinking you've been sleeping 16 hours out of every 24 because Shooter has been putting phenobarb in your food. And after that, you can start writing letters to the paper saying that America's cocaine kingpin is a gentleman from Crow's Ass, Mississippi, named John Shooter, that he killed Jimmy Hoffa and also happened to be the famous second gun who fired at Kennedy from the grassy knoll in November of 1963. The man's crazy, okay? But do you really think he drove 100 miles north and massacred your goddamn house in order to kill a magazine? Especially when there must be copies of that magazine still in existence all across America? Get serious. But still, if he hurried. No, it was ridiculous. But Mort suddenly realized he wouldn't be able to show the man his goddamn proof, would he? Not unless... The study was at the back of the house. They had converted what had once been the loft of the carriage barn. Amy, he said. It's so horrible, she wept. I was at Ted's and Isabel called. She said there were at least 15 fire trucks there, hoses spraying, crowds, rubberneckers, gawkers. You know how I hate when people come and gawk at the house, even when it's not burning down. He had to bite down hard on the insides of his cheeks to stifle a wild bray of laughter. To laugh now would be the worst thing, the cruelest thing he could possibly do, because he did know. His success at his chosen trade after the years of struggle had been a great and fulfilling thing for him. He sometimes felt like a man who has won his way through a perilous jungle where most other adventurers perish, and had gained a fabulous prize by doing so. Amy had been glad for him, at least initially. But for her there had been a bitter downside. The loss of her identity, not only as a private person, but as a separate person. Yes, he said as gently as he could, still biting at his cheeks to protect against the laughter which threatened. If he laughed, it would be at her unfortunate choice of phrasing, but she wouldn't see it that way. So often, during their years together, she had misinterpreted his laughter. Yes, I know, hon. Tell me what happened. Somebody burned down our house, Amy cried tearily. That's what happened. Is it a total loss? Yes, that's what the fire chief said. He could hear her gulping, trying to get herself under control, and then her tears stormed out again. It burned flat. Even my study? That's where it started, she sniffled. At least, that's what the fire chief said, they thought. And it fits with what Patty saw. Patty Champion? The Champions owned the house next to the Rainey's on the right. The two lots were separated by a belt of yew trees that had slowly run wild over the years. Yes. Just a second, Mort. He heard a mighty honk as she blew her nose. And when she came back on the line, she seemed more composed. Patty was walking her dog. She told the fireman... She told the fireman. This was a little after it got dark. She walked past our house and saw a car parked under the portico. Then she heard a crash from inside and saw fire in your big study window. Did she see what kind of car it was? Mort asked. He felt sick in the pit of his stomach as the news sank in. The John Shooter business began to dwindle in size and importance. It wasn't just the goddamn June 1980 issue of EQMM. It was almost all his manuscripts, both those which had been published and those which were incomplete. It was most of his first editions, his foreign editions, his contributors' copies. Oh, but that was only the start. They had lost their books, as many as 4,000 volumes. All of Amy's clothes would have burned, if the damage was as bad as she said it was, and the antique furniture she had collected, sometimes with his help, but mostly on her own, would all be cinders and clinkers now. Her jewelry and her personal papers, insurance policies, and so on, would probably be okay. The safe hidden at the back of the upstairs closet was supposed to be fireproof. But the Turkish rugs would be ash, the 1,000 or so videotapes melted lumps of plastic, the audiovisual equipment, his clothes, their photographs, thousands of them. Good Christ. And the first thing he'd thought of was that goddamn magazine. No, Amy was saying, answering the question he had almost forgotten asking in the realization of how enormous the personal loss must be. She couldn't tell what kind of car it was. She said she thought somebody must have used a Molotov cocktail or something like that, because of the way the fire came up in the window right after the sound of breaking glass. She said she started up the driveway and then the kitchen door opened and a man ran out. Bruno started to bark at him, but Patty got scared and pulled him back, although she said he just about ripped the leash out of her hand. Then the man got into the car and started it up. He turned on the headlights, and Patty said they almost blinded her. She threw her arm up to shield her eyes, and the car just roared out from under the portico. That's what she said, and she squeezed back against our front fence and pulled Bruno as hard as she could, or the man would have hit him. Then he turned out of the driveway and drove down the street, fast. And she never saw what kind of car it was? No. First it was dark, and then, when the fire started to shine through the study window, the headlights dazzled her. She ran back to the house and called the fire department. Isabel said they came fast, but you know how old our house was, and how fast dry wood burns, especially if you use gasoline. Yes, he knew. Old, dry, full of wood. The house had made an arsonist's wet dream. But who, if not Shooter, who? This terrible news, coming on top of the day's events like a hideous dessert at the end of a loathsome meal, and almost completely paralyzed his ability to think. He said it was probably gasoline. The fire chief, I mean. He was there first, but then the police came, and they kept asking questions, Mort, mostly about you, about any enemies you might have made. Enemies? And I said, I didn't think you had any enemies. I tried to answer all his questions. I'm sure you did the best job you could, he said gently. She went on as if she hadn't heard him, speaking in breathless ellipses, like a telegraph operator relating dire news aloud just as it spills off the wire. I didn't even know how to tell them we were divorced, and of course they didn't know. It was Ted who had to tell them finally. Mort, my mother's Bible. It was on the nightstand in the bedroom. There were pictures in it of my family, and it was the only thing I had of hers. Her voice dissolved into miserable sobs. I'll be up in the morning, he said. If I leave at 7, I can be there by 9:30, maybe by 9, now that there's no summer traffic. Where will you stay tonight? At Ted's? Yes, she said, sniffling. I know you don't like him, Mort, but I don't know what I would have done without him tonight. How I could have handled it, you know? All their questions. Then I'm glad you had him, he said firmly. He found the calmness, the civilization in his voice really astounding. Take care of yourself. Have you got your pills? She'd had a tranquilizer prescription for the last 6 years of their marriage, but only took them when she had to fly or he remembered, when he had some public function to fulfill. One which required the presence of the designated spouse. They were in the medicine cabinet, she said dully. It doesn't matter. I'm not stressed, just heartsick. Mort almost told her he believed they were the same thing, and decided not to. I'll be there as soon as I can, he said. If you think I could do something by coming tonight... No, she said. Where should we meet? Ted's? Suddenly, unbidden, he saw his hand holding a chambermaid's passkey, saw it turning in the lock of a motel room door, saw the door swinging open, saw the surprised faces above the sheet, Amy's on the left, Ted Milner's on the right. His blow-dried look had been knocked all aslant in a sprawl by sleep, and to Mort he had looked a little bit like Alfalfa in the old Little Rascals short subjects. Seeing Ted's hair and sleep corkscrews like that had also made the man look really real to Mort for the first time. He had seen their dismay and their bare shoulders, and suddenly, almost randomly, he thought, a woman who would steal your love when your love was really all you had. No, he said, not Ted's. What about the little coffee shop on Witcham Street? Would you prefer I came alone? She didn't sound angry, but she sounded ready to be angry. How well I know her, he thought. Every move, every lift and drop of her voice, every turn of phrase, and how well she must know me. No, he said. Bring Ted. That would be fine. Not fine, but he could live with it, he thought. 9:30 then, she said, and he could hear her standing down a little. Marchman's? Is that the name of that place? Yes, Marchman's Restaurant. Okay, 9:30 or a little earlier. If I get there first, I'll chalk a mark on the door. And if I get there first, I'll rub it out. She finished the old catechism. And they both laughed a little. Mort found that even the laugh hurt. They knew each other all right. Wasn't that what the years together were supposed to be for? And wasn't that why it hurt so goddamn bad when you discovered that? Not only could the years end, they really had. He suddenly thought of the note which had been stuck under one of the garbage cabinet's shake shingles. Remember, you have 3 days. I am not joking. He thought of saying, I've had a little trouble of my own down here, Amy, and then knew he couldn't add that to her current load of woe. It was his trouble. If it had happened later, at least you would have saved your stuff, she was saying. I don't like to think about all the manuscripts you must have lost, Mort. If you'd gotten the fireproof drawers two years ago, when Herb suggested them, maybe. I don't think it matters, Mort said. I've got the manuscript of the new novel down here. He did, too. All 14 shitty wooden pages of it. To hell with the rest. I'll see you tomorrow, Amy. I love you. He closed his lips over it. They were divorced. Could he still love her? It seemed almost perverse, and even if he did, did he have any right to say so? I'm sorry as hell about this, he told her instead. So am I, Mort. So very sorry. She was starting to cry again. Now he could hear someone, a woman probably, Isabel Fortin, comforting her. Get some sleep, Amy. You too. He hung up. All at once the house seemed much quieter than it had on any of the other nights he had been here alone. He could hear nothing but the night wind whispering around the eaves and, very far off, a loon calling on the lake. He took the note out of his pocket, smoothed it out, and read it again. It was the sort of thing you were supposed to put aside for the police. In fact, it was the sort of thing you weren't even supposed to touch until the police had had a chance to photograph it and work their juju on it. It was, Ruffle of drums and blast of trumpets, please. Evidence. Well, fuck it, Mort thought, crumpling it up again. No police. Dave Newsom, the local constable, probably had trouble remembering what he'd eaten for breakfast by the time lunch rolled around, and he couldn't see taking the matter to either the county sheriff or the state police. After all, it wasn't as though an attempt had been made on his life. His cat had been killed, but a cat wasn't a person. And in the wake of Amy's devastating news, John Shooter simply didn't seem as important anymore. He was one of the crazy folks. He had a bee in his bonnet, and he might be dangerous. But Mort felt more and more inclined to try and handle the business himself, even if if Shooter was dangerous, especially if he was dangerous. The house and dairy took precedence over John Shooter and John Shooter's crazy ideas. It even took precedence over who had done the deed. Shooter or some other fruitcake, he supposed. Or other fruitcake with a grudge, a mental problem, or both. The house and, he supposed, Amy. She was clearly in bad shape, and it couldn't hurt either of them for him to offer her what comfort he could. Maybe she would even... But he closed his mind to any speculation about what Amy might even do. He saw nothing but pain down that road. Better to believe that road was closed for good. He went into the bedroom, undressed, and lay down with his hands behind his head. The loon called again, desperate and distant. It occurred to him again that Shooter could be out there, creeping around, his face a pale circle beneath his odd black hat. Shooter was nuts, and although he had used his hands and a screwdriver on Bump, that did not preclude the possibility that he still might have a gun. But Mort didn't think Shooter was out there, armed or not. Calls, he thought. I'll have to make at least 2 on my way up to Derry. One to Greg Carstairs, and one to Herb Creekmore. Too early to make them from here if I leave at 7, but I could use one of the payphones at the Augusta toll booths. He turned over on his side, thinking it would be a long time before he fell asleep tonight after all. And then, sleep rolled over him in a smooth, dark wave, and if anyone came to peer in on him as he slept, he did not know it. The alarm got him up at 6:15. He took half an hour to bury Bump in the sandy patch of ground between the house and the lake, and by 7 he was rolling, just as planned. He was 10 miles down the road and heading into Mechanic Falls, a bustling metropolis which consisted of a textile mill that had closed in 1970, 5,000 souls, and a yellow blinker at the intersection of routes 23 and 7, when he noticed that his old Buick was running on fumes. He pulled into Bill's Chevron, cursing himself for not having checked the gauge before setting out. If he had gotten through Mechanic Falls without noticing how low the gauge had fallen, he might have had a pretty good walk for himself and ended up very late for his appointment with Amy. He went to the payphone on the wall while the pump jockey tried to fill the Buick's bottomless pit. He dug his battered address book out of his left rear pocket and dialed Greg Carstairs' number. He thought he might actually catch Greg in this early, and he was right. Hello? Hi, Greg. Mort Rainey. Oh, hi, Mort. I guess you've got some trouble in Derry, huh? Yes, Mort said. Was it on the news? Channel 5. How did it look? How did what look? Greg replied. Mort winced. But if he had to hear that from anybody, he was glad it had been Greg Carstairs. He was an amiable, long-haired ex-hippie who had converted to some fairly obscure religious sect. The Swedenborgans, maybe. Not long after Woodstock. He had a wife and 2 kids, one 7 and one 5, and so far as Mort could tell, The whole family was as laid back as Greg himself. You got so used to the man's small but constant smile that he looked undressed on the few occasions he was without it. That bad, huh? Yeah, Greg said simply. It must have gone up like a rocket. I'm really sorry, man. Thank you. I'm on my way up there now, Greg. I'm calling from Mechanic Falls. Can you do me a favor while I'm gone? If you mean the shingles, I think they'll be in by... No, not the shingles. Something else. There's been a guy bothering me the last 2 or 3 days. A crackpot. He claims I stole a story he wrote 6 or 7 years ago. When I told him I'd written my version of the same story before he claims to have written his, and told him I could prove it, he got wiggy. I was sort of hoping I'd seen the last of him, but no such luck. Last evening, while I was sleeping on the couch, he killed my cat. Bump? Greg sounded faintly startled, a reaction that equaled roaring surprise in anyone else. He killed Bump? That's right. Did you talk to Dave Newsom about it? No, and I don't want to either. I want to handle him myself if I can. The guy doesn't exactly sound like a pacifist, Mort. Killing a cat is a long way from killing a man, Mort said. And I think maybe I could handle him better than Dave. Well, you could have something there, Greg agreed. Dave slowed down a little since he turned 70. What can I do for you, Mort? I'd like to know where the guy is staying, for one thing. What's his name? I don't know. The name on the story he showed me was John Shooter, but he got cute about that later on, told me it might be a pseudonym. I think it is. It sounds like a pseudonym. Either way, I doubt if he's registered under that name if he's staying at an area motel. What does he look like? He's about 6 feet tall and 40-something. He's got a kind of weather-beaten face, sun wrinkles around the eyes and lines going down from the corners of the mouth, kind of bracketing the chin. As he spoke, the face of John Shooter floated into his consciousness with increasing clarity, like the face of a spirit swimming up to the curved side of a medium's crystal ball. Mort felt goose flesh prick the backs of his hands and shivered a little. A voice in his mid-brain kept muttering that he was either making a mistake or deliberately misleading Greg. Shooter was dangerous, all right. He hadn't needed to see what the man had done to Bump to know that. He had seen it in Shooter's eyes yesterday afternoon. Why was he playing vigilante then? Because. Another deeper voice answered with a kind of dangerous firmness. Just because. That's all. The mid-brain voice spoke up again, worried. Do you mean to hurt him? Is that what this is all about? Do you mean to hurt him? But the deep voice would not answer. It had fallen silent. Sounds like half the farmers around here, Greg was saying doubtfully. Well, there's a couple of other things that may help pick him out, Mort said. He's Southern, for one thing. Got an accent on him that sticks out a mile. He wears a big black hat, felt, I think, with a round crown. It looks like the kind of hat Amish men wear. And he's driving a blue Ford station wagon, early or mid-60s, Mississippi plates. Okay, better. I'll ask around. If he's in the area, somebody'll know where. Out-of-state plates stand out this time of year. I know. Something else crossed his mind suddenly. You might start by asking Tom Greenleaf. I was talking to the shooter yesterday on Lake Drive, about half a mile north of my place. Tom came along in his Scout. He waved at us when he went by, and both of us waved back. Tom must have gotten a damned fine look at him. Okay. I'll probably see him up at Bowie's store if I drop by for a coffee around 10. He's been there too, Mort said. I know because he mentioned the paperback book rack. It's one of the old-fashioned ones. And if I track him down, what? Nothing, Mort said. Don't do a thing. I'll call you tonight. Tomorrow night, I should be back at the place on the lake. I don't know what the hell I can do up in Derry, except scuffle through the ashes. What about Amy? She's got a guy, Mort said, trying not to sound stiff and probably sounding that way just the same. I guess what Amy does next is something the two of them will have to work out. Oh, sorry. No need to be, Mort said. He looked over toward the gas islands and saw that the jockey had finished filling his tank and was now washing the Buick's windshield, a sight he had never expected to witness again in his lifetime. Handling this guy yourself, are you really sure it's what you want to do? Yes, I think so, Mort said. He hesitated, suddenly understanding what was very likely going on in Greg's mind. He was thinking that if he found the man in the black hat and Mort got hurt as a result, he, Greg, would be responsible. Listen, Greg, you could go along while I talk to the guy if you wanted to. I might just do that, Greg said, relieved. It's proof he wants, Mort said, so I'll just have to get it for him. But you said you had proof. Yes, but he didn't exactly take my word for it. I guess I'm going to have to shove it in his face to get him to leave me alone. Oh, Greg thought it over. The guy really is crazy, isn't he? Yes, indeed. Well, I'll see if I can find him. Give me a call tonight. I will. And thanks, Greg. Don't mention it. The change is as good as the rest. So they say. He told Greg goodbye and checked his watch. It was almost 7:30, and that was too early to call Herb Creekmore. Unless he wanted to pry Herb out of bed, and this wasn't that urgent. A stop at the Augusta toll booths would do fine. He walked back to the Buick, replacing his address book and digging out his wallet. He asked the pump jockey how much he owed him. That's $22.50, and the cash discount, the jockey said, and then looked at Mort shyly. I wonder if I could have your autograph, Mr. Rainey? I have all your books. That made him think of Amy again and how Amy had hated the autograph seekers. Mort himself didn't understand them, but saw no harm in them. For her, they had seemed to sum up an aspect of their lives which she found increasingly hateful. Toward the end, he had cringed inwardly every time someone asked that question in Amy's presence. Sometimes he could almost sense her thinking, "If you love me, why don't you stop them?" As if he could, he thought. His job was to write books people like this guy would want to read. Or so he saw it. When he succeeded at that, they asked for autographs. He scribbled his name on the back of a credit slip for the pump jockey, who had, after all, actually washed his windshield, and reflected that if Amy had blamed him for doing something they liked, and he thought that, on some level, she herself might not be aware of, she had. He supposed he was guilty. But it was only the way she had been built. Right was right, after all, just as Shooter had said, and fair was fair. He got back into his car and drove off toward Derry. He paid his 75 cents at the Augusta toll plaza, then pulled into the parking area by the telephones on the far side. The day was sunny, chilly, and windy, coming out of the southwest from the direction of Litchfield, and running straight and unbroken across the open plain where the Turnpike Plaza lay. That wind was strong enough to bring tears to Mort's eyes. He relished it all the same. He could almost feel it blowing the dust out of the rooms inside his head which had been closed and shuttered too long. He used his credit card to call Herb Creekmore in New York. The apartment, not the office. Herb wouldn't actually make it to James and Creekmore. Mort Rainey's literary agency, for another hour or so. But Mort had known Herb long enough to guess that the man had probably been through the shower by now and was drinking a cup of coffee while he waited for the bathroom mirror to unsteam so he could shave. He was lucky for the second time in a row. Herb answered in a voice from which most of the sleep fuzz had departed. Am I on a roll this morning or what? Mort thought, and grinned into the teeth of the old October wind. Across the 4 lanes of highway, he could see men stringing a snow fence in preparation for the winter, which lay just over the calendar's horizon. "Hi, Herb," he said. "I'm calling you from a pay telephone outside the Augusta Toll Plaza. My divorce is final. My house and dairy burned flat last night. Some nut killed my cat, and it's colder than a well-digger's belt buckle. Are we having fun yet?" He hadn't realized how absurd his catalog of woes sounded until he heard himself reciting them aloud, and he almost laughed. Jesus, it was cold out here, but didn't it feel good? Didn't it feel clean? "Mort," Herb said cautiously, like a man who suspects a practical joke. "At your service," Mort said. "What's this about your house?" "I'll tell you, but only once. Take notes if you have to, because I plan to be back in my car before I freeze solid to this phone." He began with John Shooter and John Shooter's accusations. He finished with the conversation he'd had with Amy last night. Herb, who had spent a fair amount of time as Mort and Amy's guest, and who had been entirely dismayed by their breakup, Mort guessed, expressed his surprise and sorrow at what had happened to the house and dairy. He asked if Mort had any idea who had done it. Mort said he didn't. "Do you suspect this guy Shooter?" Herb asked. "I understand the significance of the cat being killed only a short time before you woke up, but I guess it's technically possible, and I'm not ruling it out completely," Mort said, "but I doubt it like hell. Maybe it's only because I can't get my mind around the idea of a man burning down a 24-room house in order to get rid of a magazine. But I think it's mostly because I met him. He really believes I stole his story, Herb. I mean, he has no doubts at all. His attitude when I told him I could show him proof was, 'Go ahead, motherfucker, make my day.' Still, you called the police, didn't you?" "Yeah, I made a call this morning," Mort said, and while this statement was a bit disingenuous, it was not an out-and-out lie. He had made a call this morning to Greg Carstairs, but if he told Herb Creekmore, whom he could visualize of natty tweed pants and a strap-style t-shirt, that he intended to handle this himself, with only Greg to lend a hand, he doubted if Herb would understand. Herb was a good friend, but he was something of a stereotype. Civilized man, late 20th century model, urban and urbane. He was the sort of man who believed in counseling, the sort of man who believed in mediation and mediation. The sort of man who believed in discussion when reason was present, and the immediate delegation of the problem to persons in authority when it was absent. To Herb, the concept that sometimes a man has got to do what a man has got to do was one which had its place, but its place was in movies starring Sylvester Stallone. "Well, that's good." Herb sounded relieved. "You've got enough on your plate without worrying about some psycho from Mississippi. If they find him, what will you do? Have him charged with harassment?" "I'd rather convince him to take his persecution act and put it on the road," Mort said, his feeling of cheery optimism, so unwarranted but indubitably real, persisted. He supposed he would crash soon enough, but for the time being, he couldn't stop grinning. So he wiped his leaking nose with the cuff of his coat and went right on doing it. He had forgotten how good it could feel to have a grin pasted onto your kisser. How will you do that? With your help, I hope. You've got files of my stuff, right? Right, but, well, I need you to pull the June 1980 issue of Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. That's the one with sewing season in it. I can't very well pull mine because of the fire, so... I don't have it, Herb said mildly. You don't? Mort blinked. This was one thing he hadn't expected. Why not? Because 1980 was 2 years before I came on board as your agent. I have at least one copy of everything I sold for you, but that's one of the stories you sold yourself. Oh, shit. In his mind's eye, Mort could see the acknowledgement for sewing season, and everybody drops the dime. Most of the other acknowledgments contain the line, reprinted by permission of the author and the author's agents, James and Creekmore. The one for sewing season, and 2 or 3 other stories in the collection, read only, reprinted by permission of the author. Sorry, Herb said. Of course I sent it in myself. I remember writing the query letter before I submitted. It's just that it seems like you've been my agent forever. He laughed a little, then and added, No offense. None taken, Herb said. Do you want me to make a call to EQMM? They must have back issues. Would you? Mort asked gratefully. That'd be great. I'll do it first thing. Only, Herb paused. Only what? Promise me you're not planning to confront this guy on your own once you have a copy of the printed story in hand. I promise, Mort agreed promptly. He was being disingenuous again, but what the hell? He had asked Greg to come along when he did, and Greg had agreed, so he wouldn't be alone. And Herb Creekmore was his literary agent, after all, not his father. How he handled his personal problems wasn't really Herb's concern. Okay, Herb said. I'll take care of it. Call me from Derry, Mort. Maybe it isn't as bad as it seems. I'd like to believe that. But you don't? Afraid not. Okay. Herb sighed. Then, diffidently, he added, Is it okay to ask you to give Amy my best? It is. And I will. Good. You go on and get out of the wind, Mort. I can hear it shrieking in the receiver. You must be freezing. Getting there. Thanks again, Herb. He hung up and looked thoughtfully at the phone for a moment. He'd forgotten that the Buick needed gas, which was minor, but he'd also forgotten that Herb Creekmore hadn't been his agent until 1982, and that wasn't so minor. Too much pressure, he supposed. It made a man wonder what else he might have forgotten. The voice in his mind, not the midbrain voice, but the one from the deep ranges, spoke up suddenly. What about stealing the story in the first place? Maybe you forgot that. He snorted a laugh as he hurried back to his car. He had never been to Mississippi in his life, and even now, stuck in a writer's block as he was a long way from stooping to plagiarism. He slid behind the wheel and started the engine, reflecting that a person's mind certainly got up to some weird shit every now and again. Mort didn't believe that people, even those who tried to be fairly honest with themselves, knew when some things were over. He believed they often went on believing, or trying to believe, even when the handwriting was not only on the wall, but writ in letters large enough to read 100 yards away without a spyglass. If it was something you really cared about and felt that you needed, it was easy to cheat, easy to confuse your life with TV and convince yourself that what felt so wrong would eventually come right, probably after the next commercial break. He supposed that without its great capacity for self-deception, the human race would be even crazier than it already was. But sometimes the truth crashed through, and if you had consciously tried to think or dream your way around that truth, the results could be devastating. It was like being there when a tidal wave roared not over but straight through a dike which had been set in its way, smashing it and you flat. Mort Rainey experienced one of these cataclysmic epiphanies after the representatives of the police and fire departments had gone, and he and Amy and Ted Milner were left alone to walk slowly around the smoking ruin of the green Victorian house, which had stood at 62 Kansas Street for 136 years. It was while they were making that mournful inspection tour that he understood that his marriage to the former Amy Dowd of Portland, Maine, was over. It was no period of marital stress. It was no trial separation. It was not going to be one of those cares you heard from time to time, where both parties repented their decision and remarried. It was over. Their lives together were history. Even the house where they had shared so many good times was nothing but evilly smoldering beams tumbled into the cellar hole like the teeth of a giant. Their meeting at Marchman's, the little coffee shop on Witcham Street, had gone well enough. Amy had hugged him and he had hugged her back, but when he tried to kiss her mouth, she turned her head deftly aside so that his lips landed on her cheek instead. Kiss, kiss, as they said at the office parties. So good to see you, darling. Ted Milner, blow-dried hair perfectly in place this morning, and nary an alfalfa corkscrew in sight, sat at the table in the corner, watching them. He was holding the pipe which Mort had seen clenched in his teeth at various parties over the last 3 years or so. Mort was convinced the pipe was an affectation, a little prop employed for the sole purpose of making its owner look older than he was. And how old was that? Mort wasn't sure, but Amy was 36, and he thought Ted, in his impeccable stone-washed jeans and open-throated J-press shirt, had to be at least 4 years younger than that, possibly more. He wondered if Amy knew she could be in for trouble 10 years down the line, maybe even 5, and then reflected it would take a better man than he was to suggest it to her. He asked if there was anything new. Amy said there wasn't. Then Ted took over, speaking with a faintly southern accent, which was a good deal softer than John Shooter's nasal burr. He told Mort the fire chief and a lieutenant from the Derry Police Department would meet them at what Ted called the site. They wanted to ask Mort a few questions. Mort said that was fine. Ted asked if he'd like a cup of coffee. They had time. Mort said that would also be fine. Ted asked how he had been. Mort used the word fine again. Each time it came out of his mouth, it felt a little more threadbare. Amy watched the exchange between them with some apprehension, and Mort could understand that. On the day he had discovered the two of them in bed together, he had told Ted he would kill him. In fact, he might have said something about killing them both. His memory of the event was quite foggy. He suspected theirs might be rather foggy, too. He didn't know about the other two corners of the triangle, but he himself found that foggery not only understandable, but merciful. They had coffee. Amy asked him about John Shooter. Mort said he thought that situation was pretty much under control. He did not mention cats or notes or magazines, and after a while they left Marchman's and went to 92 Kansas Street, which had once been a house instead of a site. The fire chief and police detective were there as promised, and there were questions, also as promised. Most of the questions were about any people who might dislike him enough to have tossed a Texaco cocktail into his study. If Mort had been on his own, he would have left Shooter's name out of it entirely. But of course, Amy would bring it up if he didn't. So he recounted the initial encounter just as it had happened. The fire chief, Wickersham, said, "The guy was pretty angry?" "Yes." "Angry enough to have driven to Derry and torched your house?" The police detective, Bradley, asked. He was almost positive Shooter hadn't done it, but he didn't want to delve into his brief dealings with Shooter any more deeply. It would mean telling them what Shooter had done to Bump, for one thing. That would upset Amy. It would upset her a great deal, and it would open up a can of worms he would prefer to leave closed. It was time, Mort reckoned, to be disingenuous again. He might have been at first, but after I discovered the two stories really were alike, I looked up the original date of publication on mine. His had never been published? Bradley asked. No, I'm sure it hadn't been. Then, yesterday, he showed up again. I asked him when he'd written his story, hoping he'd mention a date that was later than the one I had. Do you understand? Detective Bradley nodded. You were hoping to prove you scooped him. Right. Sowing Season was in a book of short stories I published in 1983, but it was originally published in 1980. I was hoping the guy would feel safe picking a date only a year or two before 1983. I got lucky. He said he'd written it in 1982. So you see, I had him. He hoped it would end there, but Wickersham, the fire chief, pursued it. You see and we see, Mr. Rainey, but did he see? Mort sighed inwardly. He supposed he had known that you could only be disingenuous for so long. If things went on long enough, they almost always progressed to a point where you had to either tell the truth or carve out an outright lie. And here he was at that point. But whose business was it? Theirs or his? His. Right. And he meant to see it stayed that way. Yes, he told them. He saw. What did he do? Ted asked. Mort looked at him with mild annoyance. Ted glanced away, looking as if he wished he had his pipe to play with. The pipe was in the car. The J-press shirt had no pocket to carry it in. He went away, Mort said. His irritation with Ted, who had absolutely no business sticking his oar in, made it easier to lie. The fact that he was lying to Ted seemed to make it more all right, too. He muttered some bullshit about what an incredible coincidence it all was, then jumped into his car like his hair was on fire and his ass was catching, and took off. Happen to notice the make of the car and the license plate, Mr. Rainey? Bradley asked. He had taken out a pad and a ballpoint pen. It was a Ford, Mort said. I'm sorry, but I can't help you with the plate. It wasn't a Maine plate, but other than that... He shrugged and tried to look apologetic. Inside, he felt increasingly uncomfortable with the way this was going. It had seemed okay when he was just being cute, skirting around any outright lies. It had seemed a way of sparing Amy the pain of knowing that the man had broken Bump's neck and then skewered him with a screwdriver. But now he had to put himself in a position where he had told different stories to different people. If they got together and did a comparison, he wouldn't look so hot. Explaining his reasons for the lies might be sticky. He supposed that such comparisons were pretty unlikely, as long as Amy didn't talk to either Greg Carstairs or Herb Creekmore. But suppose there was a hassle with Shooter when he and Greg caught up to him and shoved the June 1980 issue of EQMM in Shooter's face. Never mind, he told himself. We'll burn that bridge when we come to it, big guy. At this thought, he experienced a brief return of the high spirits he'd felt while talking to Herb at the toll plaza, and almost cackled aloud. He held it in. They would wonder why he was laughing if he did something like that, and he supposed they would be right to wonder. I think Shooter must be bound for Mississippi. For wherever he came from by now, he finished with hardly a break. I imagine you're right, Lieutenant Bradley said. But I'm inclined to pursue this, Mr. Rainey. You might have convinced the guy he was wrong, but that doesn't mean he left your place feeling mellow. It's possible that he drove up here in a rage and torched your house just because he was pissed off. Pardon me, Mr. Rainey. Mrs. Rainey. Amy offered a crooked little smile and waved the apology away. Don't you think that's possible? No, Mort thought. I don't. If he'd decided to torch the house, I think he would have killed Bump before he left for Derry, just in case I woke up before he got back. In that case, the blood would have been dry and Bump would have been stiff when I found him. That isn't the way it happened, but I can't say so. Not even if I wanted to. They'd wonder why I held back the stuff about Bump as long as I did, for one thing. They'd probably think I've got a few loose screws. I guess so, he said. But I met a guy. He didn't strike me as the house-burning type. You mean he wasn't a Snopes? Amy said suddenly. Mort looked at her, startled, then smiled. That's right, he said. A Southerner, but not a Snopes. Meaning what? Bradley asked, a little wearily. An old joke, Lieutenant, Amy said. The Snopeses were characters in some novels by William Faulkner. They got their start in business burning barns. Oh, Bradley said blankly. Wickersham said, There is no house-burning type, Mr. Rainey. They come in all shapes and sizes, believe me. Well, give me a little more on the car, if you can, Bradley said. He poised a pencil over his notebook. I want to make sure the state police are aware of this guy. Mort suddenly decided he was going to lie some more. Quite a lot more, actually. Well, it was a sedan. I can tell you that much for sure. Uh-huh. Ford sedan. Year? Somewhere in the 70s, I guess, Mort said. He was fairly sure Shooter's station wagon had actually been built around the time a fellow named Oswald had elected Lyndon Johnson president of the United States. He paused, then added, The plate was light color. It could have been Florida. I won't swear to it, but it could have been. Uh-huh. And the man himself? Average height, blonde hair, eyeglasses, the round wire-framed ones John Lennon used to wear. That's really all I really... Didn't you say he was wearing a hat? Amy asked suddenly. Mort felt his teeth come together with a click. Yes, he said pleasantly. That's right. I forgot. Dark gray or black, except it was more of a cap with a bill, you know? Okay. Bradley snapped his book closed. It's a start. Couldn't this have been a simple case of vandalism, arson for kicks? Mort asked. In novels, everything has a connection, but my experience has been that in real life, things sometimes just happen. It could have been, Wickersham agreed, but it doesn't hurt to check out the obvious connections. He dropped Mort a solemn little wink and said, Sometimes life imitates art. You know. Do you need anything else? Ted asked them, and put an arm around Amy's shoulders. Wickersham and Bradley exchanged a glance, and then Bradley shook his head. I don't think so. At least not at the present. I only ask because Amy and Mort will have to put in some time with the insurance agent, Ted said. Probably an investigator from the parent company as well. Mort found the man's southern accent more and more irritating. He suspected that Ted came from a part of the South several states north of Faulkner country, but it was still a coincidence he could have done without it. The officials shook hands with Amy and Mort, expressed their sympathy, told them to get in touch if anything else occurred to either of them, and then took themselves off, leaving the three of them to take another turn around the house. "I'm sorry about all this, Amy," Mort said suddenly. She was walking between them and looked over at him, apparently startled by something she had heard in his voice. Simple sincerity, maybe. "All of it. Really sorry." "So am I," she said softly and touched his hand. "Well, Teddy makes three," Ted said with solemn heartiness. She turned back to him, and in that moment Mort could have cheerfully strangled the man until his eyes popped out jittering at the ends of their optic strings. They were walking up the west side of the house toward the street now. Over here and over here had been the deep corner where his study had met the house, and not far away was Amy's flower garden. All the flowers were dead now, and Mort reflected that was probably just as well. The fire had been hot enough to crisp what grass had remained green in a 12-foot border all around the ruin. If the flowers had been in bloom, it would have crisped them as well, and that would have been just too sad. It would have been. Mort stopped suddenly. He was remembering the stories. The story. You could call it sowing season, or you could call it secret window, secret garden, but they were the same thing once you took the gewgaws off and looked underneath. He looked up. There was nothing to see but blue sky, at least now. But before that, before last night's fire, there would have been a window right where he was looking. It was the window in the little room next to the laundry. The little room that was Amy's office. It was where she went to write checks, to write in her daily journal, to make the telephone calls that needed to be made. The room where, he suspected, Amy had several years ago started a novel. And, when it died, it was the room where she had buried it decently and quietly in a desk drawer. The desk had been by the window. Amy had liked to go there in the mornings. She could start the wash in the next room and then do paperwork while she waited for the buzzer, which proclaimed it was time to strip the washer and feed the dryer. The room was well away from the main house, and she liked the quiet, she said. The quiet and the clear, sane morning light. She liked to look out the window every now and then at her flowers growing in the deep corner formed by the house and the study L. And he heard her saying, "It's the best room in the house, at least for me, because hardly anybody ever goes there but me. It's got a secret window, and it looks down on a secret garden." "Mort," Amy was saying now, and for a moment Mort took no notice, confusing her real voice with her voice in his mind, which was the voice of memory. But was it a true memory or a false one? That was the real question. It seemed like a true memory, but he had been under a great deal of stress even before Shooter, and Bump, and the fire. Wasn't it at least possible that he was having a recollective hallucination? That he was just trying to make his own past with Amy in some way conform to that goddamn story where a man had gone crazy and killed his wife? Jesus, I hope not. I hope not, because if I am, that's too close, too nervous breakdown territory for comfort. "Mort, are you okay?" Amy asked. She plucked fretfully at his sleeve, at least temporarily breaking his trance. "Yes," he said, and then abruptly, "No. To tell you the truth, I'm feeling a little sick." "Breakfast, maybe?" Ted said. Amy gave him a look that made Mort feel a bit better. It was not a very friendly look. "It isn't breakfast," she said a little indignantly. She swept her arm at the blackened ruins. "It's this. Let's get out of here. The insurance people are due at noon. Ted said. Well, that's more than an hour from now. Let's go to your place, Ted. I don't feel so hot myself. I'd like to sit down. All right. Ted spoke in a slightly nettled, no need to shout tone, which also did Mort's heart good. And although he would have said at breakfast that morning that Ted Milner's place was the last one on earth he wanted to go, he accompanied them without protest. They were all quiet on the ride across town to the split level on the east side where Ted hung his hat. Mort didn't know what Amy and Ted were thinking about, although the house for Amy, and whether or not they'd be on time to meet the Wallas from the insurance company for Ted would probably be a couple of good guesses, but he knew what he was thinking about. He was trying to decide if he was going crazy or not. Is it real or is it Memorex? He decided finally that Amy really had said that about her office next to the laundry room. It was not a false memory. Had she said it before 1982 when John Shooter claimed to have written a story called Secret Window, Secret Garden? He didn't know. No matter how earnestly he conned his confused and aching brain, what kept coming back was a single curt message. Answer inconclusive. But if she had said single curt messages, if she had said it, no matter when, couldn't the title of Shooter's story still be simple coincidence? Maybe, but the coincidences were piling up, weren't they? He had decided the fire must be, a coincidence. But the memory which Amy's garden with its crop of dead flowers had prodded forth, well, it was getting harder and harder to believe all of this wasn't tied together in some strange, possibly even supernatural fashion. And in his own way, hadn't Shooter himself been just as confused? How did you get it? He had asked. His voice had been fierce with rage and puzzlement. That's what I really want to know. How in the hell did a big money-scribbling asshole like you get down to a little shit-splat town in Mississippi and steal my goddamn story? At the time, Mort had thought either that it was another sign of the man's madness, or that the guy was one hell of a good actor. Now, in Ted's car, it occurred to him for the first time that it was exactly the way he himself would have reacted, and the circumstances had the circumstances been reversed. As, in a way, they had been. The one place where the two stories differed completely was in the matter of the title. They both fit, but now Mort found that he had a question to ask Shooter, which was very similar to the one Shooter had already asked him. How did you happen by that title, Mr. Shooter? That's what I really want to know. How did you happen to know that 1,200 miles away from your shit-splat town in Mississippi, the wife of a writer you claim you never heard of before this year had her own secret window looking down on her own secret garden? Well, there was only one way to find out, of course, when Greg ran Shooter down. Mort would have to ask him. That's it for this week. We will see you guys next week with part 4.